meeting of the Santa Barbara Creeks and Water Quality Improvement Advisory Committee. To start the last day of spring, Jen, can you call the roll to see if we have a quorum?
Chair Moldaver? Here. Ms. Weber? Here. Ms. Close? Here. Ms. Lomas? Here. Thank you.
Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of the April 2018 meeting as attached?
I move to approve the minutes.
Oh, you've got to.
I move to approve the minutes.
I second.
All right, it's been moved by Christy and seconded by Natasha to approve the draft minutes of the April meeting as submitted. Are there any questions, comments, corrections, or amendments to the draft minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstaining? All right, the draft minutes are adopted as the legal minutes. That brings us to item number 4, adjustments to the agenda. Mr. Johnson, are there any changes to the proposed agenda?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to item number 5, public comment. Members of the public can bring to the attention of the committee and the city any topic not already listed on today's agenda under the Ralph M. Brown Act for 2 or more minutes. Are there any members of the public who wish to share some thoughts with the committee at this time? All right. Hearing none, public comment is closed. That brings us to item number 6, committee member and staff communications. Do any of you have any communications since the last meeting that are worth bringing forward? As it happens, I have 4, which are, I think, of urgent interest to not only the committee but everyone in the city. Number 1, one of the reasons she's too embarrassed to be here was that one of our committee members, Penny, knows that she is featured on the cover with a photo with her pet on the current issue of the Mesa magazine. And we know she's a terrific committee member, but those of you who want to find out how amazing should pick it up. Number 2, a couple of weeks ago, there was a training session that all members of city boards and commissions are strongly encouraged to go through, and that's on rules and legal and ethical issues. And this one was at the Faulkner Gallery. You can either watch a video or do it online, and I'd really encourage everyone to do that. Number 3, one of our other committee members is also multi-talented, and any of you who are watching this in the city of Santa Barbara, make your way to the Faulkner Gallery because Natasha Lomas has 2 of her artworks in the current exhibit at the main Faulkner Gallery, and one of them was recognized by the juror for special distinction. And then finally, last Friday, I was able to sit in the Bren courtyard in the afternoon when a prominent local environmental attorney, Linda Kropp, was introducing the lead staff from Creeks and Watersheds, Cameron Benson, as the co-recipient for outstanding community service from the Environmental Studies program at UCSB. And the other winner, to show you how seriously they take this, was Margaret Connell, the former president of the school board and the founding mayor of the city of Goleta. So although Cameron isn't here, I can't tell you what an enthusiastic round of applause he got after Linda's introduction. I think there's some photos. I know his wife Lisa took some, and it was a very exciting moment. But if there's nothing else, let's go to item number 7A, Arroyo Burrow Restoration at Hidden Valley Project Update. That's attachment 2, and it'll be presented by our supervisor, George Johnson. George?
Good evening, everyone. So, yes, I'm going to be talking about the Arroyo Burrow Restoration at Hidden Valley. We'll give you guys an idea of where it's located. This project location here in red, it's outlined. This is Highway 101 and Modoc Road, so it's downstream of that. This is our open space restoration project at Arroyo Burrow that we're also constructing this summer, and it's upstream of that. It's within the city's Hidden Valley Open Space Park. That's a 10-acre park owned by the city and managed by the city. And we are going to do restoration within that park. It's not going to be the entire 10 acres. It'll be almost 3 acres will be restored as part of this project. 1,500 linear feet of creek, and specifically it's between Calle de los Amigos and Torino Drive. We'll go over the existing conditions now. Currently, before I get started, I just want to note that we've done a lot of larger creek restoration projects in the past. But this particular project is going to be a little different in that we're not going to be using big, heavy machinery. We're not going to go in and completely clear out the site like we've done in other places, just because, in general, the habitat is pretty good in this location. But there are some things that do need improvement, and that's what we're going to focus on with this restoration project. So we do have a mature native plant community out there. There are some issues, as I'll point out later, but there's quite a few willow trees, native willow trees, some oaks, some sycamores, and some understory plants, but a little bit lacking in diversity. Okay, why is this not working? There we go, sorry. So the first issue area is with non-natives. You can see how that ivy is basically killing that willow tree. There's Cape ivy, there's English ivy, there's nasturtium. There's a bunch of different species in there that are kind of invading a lot of the natives. And so as part of the project, we're going to try to address that. We also have pipe and wire revetment throughout this section of creek. And that is basically a really strong form of fencing that was put in by flood control back in the 60s to try to reduce bank erosion. And then the last thing is we don't have large areas of erosion, bank erosion in this section, but we do have a few smaller ones that we are going to try to address as part of the restoration project. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble with this. So the first thing is that pipe and wire revetment that I mentioned. There's about 450 feet of it that we will be removing. I think there's another 150 that we're going to keep in place that is actually functioning. Because sometimes this pipe and wire revetment can help stabilize the bank, but other locations it's been destroyed by large storm events, or it ends up being in the middle of the creek channel and not really doing any good at all, actually increasing bank erosion. When we take this pipe and wire revetment out, we will be replacing it with plants mostly. That's our biotechnical bank stabilization. We won't be putting any rock or riprap in. We will probably use some core fiber rolls in a few locations and a little bit of matting, but basically we'll be trying to plant to stabilize the banks in any location where we remove the pipe and wire revetment. Okay, and then sorry, went the wrong way. So the next part, a big part of the restoration project is removal of non-native trees. A total of 18 trees are going to be removed. And 14 of those are chamois ash, and 4 of those are blue gum eucalyptus. The chamois ash are pretty invasive. They grow down in the creek channel kind of like alders do, so we want to remove those and replace them with native alder species. And then the blue gum eucalyptus, within that open space park, there's at least over 100 large blue gum eucalyptus that are currently there. It kind of sets the mood for that park, and people do enjoy those trees. So we're not going to go and do some whole-scale removal of all the eucalyptus. We're just taking a few out that are right next to the creek channel, and we want to replace those with some native species that will get large, like sycamores and oaks. And then the another part of the project that we're going to do as part of restoration is this. There's a little playground and picnic area just upstream of the Torino Drive bridge. And in that park, there are some old pads, concrete pads for where there were picnic tables. We're actually going to take those out, and there's kind of an old dilapidated fence that runs along the top of the creek bank. We're going to move that fence towards the active area of the park about 10 feet and replace it with a nicer fence, and then do some restoration in that zone, put some native plants and some signs. Because it's a more active area of the park, people visit it frequently, and so it's a good area for interpretive signage, and it's also a nice area for people to picnic and see what native plants and a restored creek looks like. And then the last big portion of the restoration project is removal of those non-native ivy species and other understory plants that I pointed out before, and then going in and planting new plants. We'll be putting in over 2,000 new native plants and trees, 685 trees specifically. So that's quite a few in that area. So it really should help improve habitat and replace some of the trees and vegetation we're removing. And then as part of that, we'll be putting an irrigation system in to water those plants for the first 3 to 5 years. So we did do a lot of community outreach for this project back in 2017 in August. We had a couple of community meetings. And at that point, we didn't really have any plans for the project yet. We just wanted to get people's input, how they felt about the park, what they wanted to see, what they liked and didn't like. And so we took that input and used it as part of our restoration plans. We went to the Creeks Advisory Committee. You guys had a site visit out there in August. And then just recently in May, we went back with the concept plans for the project. And there was a lot of questions at the meetings, but broad support for it. There was no real issues with anything from the public. And we tried to listen and kind of do as much as we could with what the comments we got back in August of 2017. So those meetings went well, and now we're ready to move forward with the project. The estimated construction budget, as you can see, it's about 265,000, but that's pretty low if you compare that to like the open space Arroyo Burrow restoration project that we're moving forward. That's 1.6 million or so. So because we're not going in with big tractors and doing this giant removal, we're just going to be more selective with the removal of those non-natives and replacement. The costs are quite a bit lower. Basically, this section of creek isn't as bad as some of the others, and so we don't have to do that to restore it. So that's just a breakdown of some of the costs. And here's basically the timeline. We are completed with design now. We have our permit applications in and should receive those hopefully by the end of the month. And then we hope to go out to bid then for the landscape, and then just a small construction contract to remove the fencing and the concrete pads and the pipe and wire revetment. And then we hope to, it's going to take anywhere from 2 to 4 months. We're just not quite sure how long, but that's in general. We have that time frame. We hope to be completed by November of this year. And I just wanted to mention one more thing. Tim Burgess is actually the project manager for this. I'm filling in because he's on vacation. So if you have some specific questions, you can try and contact him. But I'm available to try and answer anything I can.
Thank you, George. Are there any questions about the Arroyo Burrow restoration at Hidden Valley? Natasha?
I just have a couple quick ones. How do you propose, since you're not using bulldozers, which is great?
Yeah.
How do you propose to remove the non-natives, especially the ivies, which you got to really rip them out by the roots?
Yeah, we're going to do that all by hand, and so we do have I think it was $50,000 just specifically to do that by hand, and we have done a test. We have a landscape contractor on. Basically on retainer that we use for maintaining our restoration sites. And we took them out there and had them do a small area to see how long it took. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of extrapolated that to the whole site. And that's how we based our estimates on how long it would take and how much it would take. So we are going to try and do it by hand without herbicides at the beginning and see how that goes. because it's so intermixed with the native species we want to try to preserve, like blackberry and rose and some other species in there. We don't want to go through and weed whip it or, get machinery in there to pull it out. And we haven't done it like this before, and so it's a little bit of a new area for us, but we think it's worthwhile trying in these areas where we do have some pretty good habitat that we don't want to disturb.
Actually, I always prefer that because if you get something out in the roots, chances of them coming back are much less. So upfront work is higher, but your
Yep.
long-term maintenance is shorter.
And we do realize we will have a lot of long-term maintenance. These species are pretty invasive. Lots of seed material in the soil. So,
Castor bean?
no, we don't have a lot of castor bean. Yeah,
Because that's 7 years for each seed to.
right.
Yeah.
I'm sure some of them last even longer, but yeah, I think the Cape ivy will be probably the toughest because you got to get every little piece supposedly, and the little pieces can grow.
That's going to be a tough one. And how long do you plan to irrigate it? Just until.
About 3 to 5 years, unless we don't get some good germination or good growth for some reason, and we might have to extend it. But typically, after about year 3 or 4, we don't really need the irrigation anymore. And this is pretty shady, so lots of trees in this area, so that should help not to have to use as much water.
Great, thank you.
And any other questions for George? Christy?
You talk about removing 4 of the blue gum and replacing them with alders, but
Sorry, we'd probably replace those with sycamore and oaks. The alders would be we would replace the chamal ash. They're growing lower down they're like feeder in the water, so we want to kind of replace the ash with the alder. If I misspoke there.
oh no, you may not have. I probably misunderstood. Just what I've seen out in this area after 7 years of protracted drought, the alders don't really do that well.
No, not unless they're down in the water, and that's where we plan on putting them, because there is year-round water here, even through the drought. We have quite a bit of water because there are a lot of springs in the Las Positas Valley. So we anticipate that the alders won't die in this location like they've done further upstream in areas that have dried out.
I've just seen that in general, the sycamores do much better.
Right.
And seem to be a little more tolerant to pests as well.
Even oaks, they're really drought tolerant. Like they grow slow, but man, they're hard to kill in dry conditions. They really do well then.
Yeah. That was it. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, Betsy, any questions?
I have one more, sorry.
Natasha?
Sorry, I have one more. Several years ago, I went on the backside of the area and was told that there was a monarch roosting site. So how close is this plant removal going to come to that? And are any of the eucalyptus that you're going to remove or close to the roosting site?
We did have a consultant. I wish I knew who it was, but I think it was like Althouse and Mead. Somebody who does, Dan who
Mead.
does the a lot of the work with the butterflies. He did go out and look at the site and didn't find, and we did it at the right season and everything, and we didn't find any roosting behavior or any big roosts. So we haven't been worried about the tree removal of those 4 eucalyptus in relation to the monarchs.
Actually, thinking about it, I think I went out there with Dan Mead, so on a different project.
Different, yeah. This was, and there may have been some in the past there. You know how it seems like there's fewer monarchs in the area, but these are kind of more single trees, and there are areas where there's these thicker groves, and those might be more attractive to the
Probably
butterflies.
so.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, George. Good presentation. If anyone who's watching at home wants to share a question or a suggestion, to where would they direct it?
You can direct it to Tim Burgess, or you can go to the Creeks website, and they'll have contact information for all of us, and there should be a little write-up on this project actually on the website.
Yeah, okay. Thank you,
That's
George.
sbcreeks.com, right? Yeah, sbcreeks.com.
Okay, that brings us to item 7B, Water Quality Research and Monitoring Program, which will be introduced by Dr. Jill Murray. And as you listen to Jill's presentation and look at the visuals in the handout, please keep in mind that we're going to be asked to make a recommendation to enact the suite of projects that Dr. Murray is going to be describing. So we're going to need a motion to approve.
Up, yeah. And then just roll it. I had a little trouble with it, but.
Go to a slideshow. No, go to slideshow. Okay, where is it? At the top tab. There we go. And then go all the way to the left and click it. Yeah.
Okay, good evening, committee. Thank you. Okay, how do I go to the next?
Roll it with your finger forward, I think. That's how I was doing it. Or backward.
Okay. I will briefly go over kind of our motivations behind the research and monitoring plan and talk about the few changes, the limited changes that have been made for fiscal year 19 coming up. I will then give some select results and updates on some ongoing projects that you've already heard about, and then finish with next steps. Okay, so the goals of the Water Quality Research and Monitoring Plan, and I'm actually going to stop right here and say from here until kind of the end of the description of the research plan, it's really where the committee and the community can really provide input. If there's any additional questions or research topics that you think are pertinent to the mission of the Creeks Division, please come forward and communicate those to us. So the first thing we try to do is quantify pollution in our creeks and watersheds. That can look like quantifying concentrations or fluxes or loads of different pollutants. We then, once we have those numbers, try to evaluate the impacts of those pollutants by comparing them to known thresholds, levels of toxicity that are known to cause problems, recreational criteria. Once we then know we have a problem, then we try to find out where the pollution is coming from and how we can ameliorate that getting into the creeks. So that can include evaluating project effectiveness, and which involves collecting baseline data and then post-project data. We're also interested in evaluating long-term trends, and so we collect some data that is just purely for that purpose. So those are all of our want to do's, and then the must do's are meeting our grant requirements, complying with our NPDES permit, and investigating 303D impaired waters. We do all of this in order to develop strategies and prioritize projects and programs for the Creeks Division, and so that we can communicate with the public about what's out there, both in terms of risk to human health and ecological health. Our program is very question-driven and has very adaptable sampling strategies. So as you look through the attached monitoring plan, we just try to organize it by some elements. So now we shift the order. Now we have our must-dos up front, so we never lose track of those. We've got our permit requirements, our grant requirements, general watershed assessment, storm monitoring. We try to keep all of those together so that we stay organized, so that we know exactly what we're preparing for as we have the storm season come upon us and individual storms to monitor. Our restoration and water quality project assessment, some of that can take place during storms, so we just try to make sure we're compiling everything in an organized way. We're continuing to work on microbial source tracking, beach water quality, illicit discharge detection, and conduct creek walks, cleanups, and bioassessment. So then attached to the list of so you'll see for each of those elements there's a list of questions. That's another place where the community can jump in and provide input, and then there's a sampling table in the back that then has approach for each question. Sometimes that does involve sampling, sometimes it doesn't. When it does involve sampling, we then have our parameters and frequency and sites.
Dr. Murray, if the public wants to access this and submit questions or suggestions, where would they find the draft?
I believe they'd find that on the agenda for this meeting, the associated materials with the agenda for this meeting, and then they can contact me, Jill Murray, at the Creeks Division.
Yeah,
I
okay.
can call the main number to
Thank
get
you.
my contact info. So we are not making any drastic changes to the research plan this year at all. Last year, as I'll talk about in a minute, we added looking into ash impacts from the Thomas Fire, and we'll continue to do that for one additional storm. Our NeoNIC research has generated some follow-up questions, including some work on pollen and mulch. We're going to look into some new bioretention planters that the city has put in the Public Works building, look at the performance of those. We have our new Arroyo Burro open space assessment monitoring. We're starting to look into environmental impacts of tobacco. That's in partnership with UCSB and UCSD. We are continuing to collect information at the bird refuge, but we have some new specific tasks associated with our upcoming restoration project and permitting. And then the recycled water plant is back on and has matured biologically, so we're going to do some testing of the recycled water that we may irrigate with close to a creek, et cetera. And we're done looking at the temperature gradients along Las Positas Channel, so that's out, and we're done with our grant requirements for permeable pavers. So while we will continue to monitor the paver projects, we're not submitting updated grant reports or anything. So now moving on to these are just the updates on our current water quality research. The Thomas Fire, while it was absolutely huge and devastating, did not burn very much within the city limits or the main city watersheds at all. It only burned about 20% or less than 20% of Sycamore watershed, and so we know a lot about impacts from fire to the creeks that are having the erosion of the burned areas. We know that from our water quality monitoring, our bioassessment work that we do with ecology consultants, and then there's extensive literature on fire impacts to creeks. But we did communicate. We tried to pull together the regional researchers within the region to see if anyone was kind of taking on a larger science project to look at overall impacts of the Thomas Fire. It didn't really look like there was any kind of condensed project for us to support. So we kind of went on and just decided because we were blanketed by ash at an unprecedented level, let's look at the impacts of ash on water quality, especially because it's known to raise pH and known to contain elevated levels of metals and pHs. And we hear a lot of messages about ash cleanup. We heard a lot of messages about ash cleanup during the fire and making sure to not hose it down the gutter because of possible impacts to water quality. So one of the first things we did was put in a what's called a sonde or a data logger into Laguna Channel before the first rain came, and this collected pH every few minutes. And let's see, it also collected conductivity and dissolved oxygen too. But during so these two graphs are time from January 3rd to January 11th. They're lined up, these vertical lines going to line up the time. And this is the rainfall. And then we have our pH. pH doesn't have units, and conductivity, and these are millisiemens per centimeter. So the very first small rain on January 3rd, pH, I think these are just artifacts. pH did not go up significantly. In fact, it went down once it started raining. Rainwater has lower pH than creek water. And so, if anything, we saw a decrease in pH, no spikes due to any rapid. We picked Laguna Channel because it's the most paved area within the city. And if anywhere we're going to have ash impacts quickly, it would be Laguna Channel. And we left the logger in there for a while. This you can also see conductivity drop here right when the rain comes, and then the conductivity meter was broken here, and then we had the big rain on January 9th. We were out there sampling during this part of the storm. But you can also see pH did not go up during that. So we did not see any direct impacts to pH from ash in runoff in Laguna Channel. And we also did more water quality testing. We picked 2 sites, that same site at Laguna Channel and Rattlesnake Creek. We wanted 2 sites that had similar watershed size, but really different degrees of pavement imperviousness. So we should see, really quick runoff in Laguna Channel. If there was ash with elevated pHs and metals, we should see that pretty quickly getting into the channel. Then we could compare that as a control. We had Rattlesnake Creek, which is almost entirely not paved, and runoff ash would take a lot longer to get into the creek. When we sampled them very close in time, we did Laguna Channel first because it was getting the runoff more quickly, and then raced up the hill to Rattlesnake. Tested for metals, nutrients, PAHs, which are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. They are they're of combustion origin, and they can be highly toxic and carcinogenic. And toxicity. We sent samples out for toxicity tests. We didn't find in any of the samples, 2 storms, 2 sites, any elevated levels of metals or any detections of pHs at all, and didn't find any reduced survivorship in our toxicity tests. So what we can say for this towards our messaging is really we can allow the rain to clean up this ash. If we were to hose it down into the creek when the amount of flow in the creek is so much lower, I don't know what the impacts would be. We know from other research that if you just soak ash in water, it does really release a lot of pHs and metals and raises the pH. Okay, now an update on our neonic pesticide project. I've talked to you about this many times, but just as background, this was funded mostly by NOAA's Sea Grant. Measure B has contributed as well. It's in partnership with UCSB, Hunter Lenahan, Jay Means, Eric Mueller, and USGS, United States Geological Service, Michelle Laddick. And we're doing field testing, laboratory toxicity tests, and modeling ecological impacts. UCSB got a no-cost extension to get an extra year to finish their part. But we finished our field testing a while ago, and last time I was here, I presented results from that showing that during storms, we get spikes of imidacloprid and fipronil, and then afterwards they remain at right around chronic toxicity levels for weeks to up to a month after a storm. And then when you get those back-to-back storms, I mean, you really could argue that there is almost continuous exposure to imidacloprid and fipronil at low levels for a lot of aquatic organisms. We also sent samples out, creek samples during those storms to be tested for toxicity and didn't find any toxicity. But it's known that, those tests are looking at 5 to 10 days and do not necessarily reflect what is going on long-term in a creek. UCSB laboratory tests and their modeling, while not complete yet, thus far do not show impacts at the low concentrations. They're seeing impacts at much higher concentrations than we're finding in creeks. And so we could kind of stop here and just say, okay, our job is done, but I feel very compelled because we've never seen any pesticide results like this. These pesticides are so soluble and continuing to seep into the storm drains, well after storms. I don't want to walk away. I don't want to leave a stone unturned yet. And so we looked at, why are those chronic thresholds where they are? And they're based on literature reports of really high sensitivity of mayflies, which are one kind of aquatic insect, to low levels of imidacloprid. And so we thought, maybe we can use some of our bioassessment data. We have years of bioassessment data. Are we seeing any declines of mayflies while we've been collecting this data? And then also there's literature reports of huge decreases of terrestrial insects, flying winged insects. Most of that research has been done in Europe, but 75% decline over 30 years. And would we possibly be able to see any declines in total aquatic insects? And so we worked with, this shows the time period. This panel on the left shows, this is from literature that was published Del Conso, and this shows that the amount of, neonic pesticides and fipronil just skyrocketed from 2000, or let's see this, it's hard to see, I think that is 2000 right there, 2000 to 2012. The line is the total sales, the bars are the applications of the different neonic pesticides. We don't need to look at the details there. And this map shows some of our newer mapping of our bioassessment data. We hired Kristen Cawthorn, a water quality intern who was able to do really excellent GIS and programming work to put these maps together. We have all of our bioassessment, our indices of biological integrity, all of the different measures that go into the index of biological integrity mapped in relation to, the gray is the percent perviousness. We have all of our different fire maps. I'm not going to go into the details of the results, but we have for each, this is index of biological integrity. We have our time series for each site. So we can really start to see visually how different sites are responding and different metrics are responding over time. And what we know from experts like Scott Cooper at UCSB, Jeff Brinkman, who collects this data, is a lot of the BMI, benthic macroinvertebrates, or aquatic insects, really respond to the levels of flow during the winter. So like high scouring events really change the ecology. Drought really changes the ecology. We know that land use really changes the ecology. But working with Scott Cooper and all of the data collected, funded by the city and the county, collected since 2000, we selected the data that had we selected the data for sites that had at least 8 years of data kind of over that span and did a multiple regression, 9 creeks, 16 sites. And we did find a significant decrease from this time period in our total BMI, total benthic macroinvertebrate abundance, the abundance of our sensitive mayfly families. We go to family level. Decline in insect diversity, so the number of families from all of the number of all of the different insect families, and the number of families of sensitive insects to those who are in the know. That's known as EPT richness. So that should make all of us gasp. That is, we're trying to restore creeks. We're trying to build fish passages. We're trying to restore steelhead, and we're seeing a decline in the food they eat and the food that a lot of birds eat. And this could really, be a sign of disruption of the ecosystems. We found this result in our reference sites and our impacted sites. So it's not, although we haven't tested for neonics in our reference sites, and that will come next, I don't think we'd find them in high concentrations or at all, and especially not during storms. So we have more work to do. This does not prove any kind of direct connection between neonics and insect ecology. Some possible explanations could be climate change, could be neonics, that could be the effect of, and possibly wildfire, although we have controlled a little bit for temperature and a lot for wildfire in this analysis. We'll continue to do more. So for our reference sites, what could be going on? If neonics were impacting aquatic insects in the areas where we know the neonics are being used, which is all of the urban areas and agricultural areas, would that affect dispersal of the insects back up into the higher watersheds, and so you just get a little bit less dispersal over time? Are dogs hiking in reference areas that are treated with imidacloprid for flea and ticks and fipronil for flea and ticks? Is that washing off into the creeks? We really don't know, and so there's remaining work to be done. But we'll be presenting this. We'll be presenting this at a conference, the Society for Environmental Toxicology conference in November. Oh, and I should say, we're also going to hire an intern to help us really dig even deeper into the statistics. So, and then ending with this is just a status update on our pollutant load model, which I've also told you about. Our model is complete. We've put in all of our public BMPs, which were required by the Water Board to address. We've also voluntarily put in an estimation of what we think the water quality improvement is from all of our private BMPs that have gone in as a result of our development requirements and retrofit requirements. And so when our next big report is due to the Water Board in October, that will have our estimation of our total program effectiveness when it comes to reducing stormwater volume and some stormwater estimates of pollution. And then we are required to use that for prioritizing future projects. So we will be looking forward to doing that and submitting that to the Water Board. And I'll finish there with next steps. Upon your approval, we'll carry out the FY19 research plan and then come back in December with our year-long, our annual report from FY18, which I just gave you the update on. And with that, I'll take questions and discussion.
Yeah. Thank you, Jill. Are there any questions or suggestions from any of the committee members? Natasha or Christy or?
You may have already done this, but one thing that I just thought of thinking about your data is everyone talks about, lack of water over this drought with climate change, and we see our creeks drying up. So what that means over that window that you were looking at is that if you knew something about the discharge over that window, and then you're trying to look at X pollutant, you can imagine that the concentration would go up if the discharge goes down. So it'd be interesting to look at what types of discharge you have over that period to see because one of the arguments is that, everyone talks about lack of water, but the quality of the water is also a huge issue that a lot of people don't think about and they overlook. And your data really show that. So I think it's a really interesting thing to think about and maybe something to kind of address a little bit.
Thank you, Ms. Close. Yeah, and I didn't pause to say that we cut the data off at 2012. So that the main drought is not included in that data analysis because, that really influenced things dramatically and probably more so than any of the subtleties we were looking at here. So that was the first year of the drought. So we cut it off, it was equal to other years that had low water, but not 2 years in a row. But I also agree that, and we really learned that looking for the sign, the sewer leaks and the human fecal contamination is that during storms, it's pretty diluted. And so you don't generally pick up those signals. And it's during the low flows, if you have some kind of chronic sewer leak into low flow, that's really the only time you're going to find it and be able to track it upstream. So I agree. We've done some neonic testing in summer and didn't find anything. But when you think about those, the sampling that we did after the storms, the flow was going down rapidly and the concentrations were remaining fairly steady once the main pulse of the storm was gone. So that probably the flow was dropping, and so probably we were having less load of neonics coming in, but because there was low flow, the concentration was staying up there. So it's a really good point. We don't have neonic data from the time period we're looking at. It's just sort of looking at synchronized time periods, but they're not connected.
I look forward to looking at the data from 2012 forward.
I can tell you that things did not bounce back. So this wasn't just a short-term, decadal variation. But we will, Jeff and Scott will be doing major deep dives into the impacts of drought and fire on all of this data. They were, I think, very generous to let me say, wait, stop. I've got to stop and look at this short time period with just the couple of metrics that I think the literature is suggesting might be especially responsive to neonics. And I was really grateful that they, were supportive of that and were really helpful with the statistics as well. Yeah.
I'd just like to add that this year may be a really interesting year because what I've noticed is actually more surface water flows because all the vegetation has been removed. There's less transpiration of the plants. And so creeks that are normally dry this time of year have low water flows. And I've seen that even all through Montecito now. So you're going to have a little different water flow from the drought in the middle of the drought.
Okay.
So that may skew the data just a little bit.
Right. And that's why I cut that date off
Yeah,
for this analysis.
yeah.
The data was cut off at 2012. And, but like I said we just didn't have that much burned area
Yeah.
in the city.
But it will affect, the upper watershed. If it did outside the city limits still burnt, you're going to have some less vegetation up there.
Sycamore, about 20% of it burned outside of the city. Really, almost nothing burned inside of the city. So we'll look for that. I mean, Sycamore has been so dry in the lower watershed.
Water flow in Sycamore at all? No surface water flows?
Not at the not at like down by the zoo, but there usually is. Even during the drought, there was flow up higher in Sycamore. There are some springs up there, some really high conductivity springs.
And speaking of the conductivity, I have I have two questions. You said there's significant change on the decrease of the insect families, but what is the percentage? Can you you said the 75 was in Europe. Do you have a percentage of the decrease in BMI for the insects? Or can you just
no? So I used
Ballpark?
standardized regression coefficients, so it's not directly relatable, and those are the ones I have in my head. So standardized regression coefficient for total BMI was 0.35, which was about half of the standardized regression coefficient for rain sensitive metrics. Total BMI is not rain sensitive. And some for the ones that respond most highly to development. So for total BMI, it was not a small impact, and it was highly significant. There are some caveats with our data. Primarily, we're treating them as individual sampling points, but they're not random, that they're at the same site with the same development. So that's why we're going to seek some additional expertise on the statistics.
Okay, thank you. One more question. You showed a slide where you had the pH and the conductivity, and there was during the really high storms there was a little blip on the pH.
Right.
Yes.
There.
Yes. Can you explain that, please?
I cannot explain it to you, but I can. One of the reasons we even had the sonde in there, we've had it in there anyways, is to look at something getting into Laguna Channel that's changing conductivity and pH semi-regularly. And so I don't know if that's what that excursion is from. It's from the second pulse of rain. So it was like late in the afternoon. I don't know why that would have released us like a plug of ash.
Or somebody releasing something out on a parking lot?
Right. So something
Yeah.
like that. And we are continuing to put that sonde in Laguna Channel and try to figure out what is going on in there, because either there's pulses of fresh water, or there's pulses of reclaimed water, or there's pulses of something much worse. So that is definitely on our radar.
The reason I'm asking is Laguna Channel has western pond turtle in it, and I was wondering how they're not as sensitive as fish, obviously, but I was wondering if there was any change that would affect the western pond turtle.
I haven't seen it above 8.2. I think 8 is the...
8's still pretty safe, even for fish.
Right. So can we talk later about if you have any thresholds?
Yeah, I don't.
Western pond turtle?
I'd have to go look that up. I know the threshold for steelhead is 9.
Okay.
I don't know about the turtles.
Okay.
So I don't know if you were doing the sampling, if you saw an increase, decrease of turtles, or
I've never seen a western
they're
pond
usually
turtle.
hiding out this time of year anyway. They're burrowed into the banks.
I know some of our staff have seen them, and George Johnson probably has. I haven't.
Yeah, we haven't done any surveys of Laguna Channel. The City Public Works Department might be doing it for their vegetation removal maintenance practices there, but I haven't seen any of that data.
And again, it depends what time of year they take it. You know, if it's during the January storm, like I said, they're hidden in burrows. Thank you.
Ms. Weber, do you have any questions? Okay. Dr. Murray, thank you for, before I ask if there's a motion for the committee to concur with the staff recommendations and recommend implementation of the program described, which I'm going to do in a second, I want to see if there are any questions in our lively audience that people would like to get on the record.
No questions here.
Okay. So is there a motion to concur with the staff recommendations just presented and recommend implementing the proposed research and monitoring plan for fiscal year 2019?
I move to concur and implement this program for 2019.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second that.
All right. It's been moved and seconded to concur and recommend implementation of the proposed research and monitoring plan for fiscal year 2019. Are there any final questions, corrections, or amendments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Are there any opposed? Are there any abstentions? All right, the motion to concur is passed unanimously. Thank you very much, Dr. Murray.
And thank you to the committee.
And then before we go to item number 8, which will be our first attempt to adjourn, let me ask Ms. Hollywood, time and place of our next meeting as it stands now. Right. So obviously people at home who survived the solstice weekend and July 4th will want to circle that date, time, and place on their calendars immediately. Is there a motion to adjourn?
A motion to adjourn.
All right. So we're adjourned at 6:28 p.m. Thank you very much.